Hello friend, and welcome back. Thank you for watching another watercolor painting session with me. In this video I will show you how I painted this simple backlit watercolor night. This is a beginner-friendly exercise using a few simple loose techniques. So if you'd like to paint along, I invite you to grab your supplies and follow along with me. So I'll start by wetting my paper with clean water and a clean brush. I'm using just a flat brush here just to lay down an even layer of water. I've got my paper taped to just the back of a clipboard, and I've got my Winsor & Newton watercolor paints there beside me. So the fun begins by dropping in the watercolor paint. I've got a mix of phthalo turquoise and Prussian blue, and I'm just swiping it in a little bit around the edges. So this will be a backlit scene, so I want to keep the center of the painting white. That's where the brightest light will be shining behind the trees, and the edges of course will darken as the light spreads. So that's what we're doing here, is building that background of light. Rinse off my brush and dab it on a paper towel so it's a clean brush and just kind of damp. What I'm doing is using a thirsty brush so that I can pick up some of the pigment that's on the page there to make light rays. So with a thirsty brush, add pressure to the brush on the page, and as I move across the page, across that wet pigment, because it's still wet, the brush will pick it up and we'll get those sort of light beams. So here I'm just continuing to build up that background area. I want to really darken the edges a little more. I know it's going to dry lighter, so I want to make sure the darkest edges, or excuse me, the edges of the painting are darkest, and we've really got that burst of light coming through. Adding in a little bit of Mars black here just to give it a little more foggy feel, foggy color. Again, I'm using that thirsty brush technique to pull up some of the pigment I laid down to get those light rays, and just continue to add pigment around the edges and darken them up where I want it to be darker. Okay, so here I'm going to take a quick break to dry this layer using a hair dryer. So I'll pause the camera and pick back up. So I noticed after I dried it, my water was my paper was kind of puddled up on the left side, so it gave me that hard edge where it dried. That happens, and the way to avoid that is to not have so much water on your paper, especially if it's a lower quality lower quality of paper that I'm using here. But it's okay. You won't even notice it in a little bit. Okay, let's start putting in the trees just with a loose brush. I've got a light wash of paint on my brush, and I'm just barely kind of dabbing across the page here to give the kind of suggestion of a tree in the background. And another light wash with a watery mix of paint over here on the right. We have another tree that will fade into the background once it dries. That's why we're keeping this layer watery and not using too much pigment with these background trees. So you can see I'm just repeating the same process with these background trees. A light wash just to give suggestion of trees in the background. Hit it with the hair dryer again, and now I'm going to come back with more pigment on my brush this time because we're going to start building the trees that are more in the foreground. And instead of painting the whole tree, these are let's say pine trees, and they're going to be full pine trees. They're going to be heavy with snow. There's light shining from the background. So the richest pigment, the richest amount of paint is going to be coming down the center of the tree. And then here you see me coming in, I'm using just clean water here and using just the paint that's already on the page. Bringing in clean water to pull out the pigment that's there and really let it bleed out a little on its own. So I'm coming in with more pigment on my brush to darken up the center of the tree and let it bleed out through the magic of watercolor. Let it bleed out into those wet areas of the tree. Doing the same process again with this tree. This is going to be my main tree, our main focal tree. It's going to be the biggest because it's closest to us. Again, I'm coming in with just clean water on my brush to let the pigment that's already on the paper fill in the tree. and I'll kind of go back and forth between pigment, dropping in pigment in the middle of the tree and bringing in clean water along the outer branches. I think it's important to note here, I don't really have a plan for these branches. I'm not being precise with the shape of the branches or the placement of them. I know that a pine tree is skinny at the top, at the point, and comes down wide. So with just a loose hand, I'm just dabbling in the branches and leaving some white space so that light can shine through. You know, if you look at a real tree up close, there's bits of light that peek through the branches, so I'm keeping that in mind. But otherwise, I'm just keeping a loose hand and building it from the center out. Okay, so I've dried it again with the hair dryer, and after it dried, I realized my background, my sky, isn't as saturated as I'd like it to be, and I lost some of those rays because, well, I painted trees over them. So because this is completely dry, I'm coming in with clean water again and painting right over with clean water the sky, some of the tree, but really just trying to get in the sky area. I do end up bringing the water down a little more into the trees. If you decide to do this, make sure your paper is completely dry before you come back in with the clean water, or else you may smudge your trees. But since it was completely dry, the clean water isn't smudging it too much, and I'm able to come back in and drop in some pigment in places where I feel like it needs more contrast, and build that sky back up and pull some of the pigment out, again with that thirsty brush technique, pull some pigment out to get more of that light ray that I really wanted. Okay, so I've again dried it with the hair dryer, and I've got my white gouache out, and I grabbed just an old brush. It's a stiff, hard brush. It's been used and loved a lot. So I'm going to pick up some of that gouache, just mixing in a little bit of water here in the lid of the container, so that we can do the fun part of making it snow. I tested it right there on the paint just to see if I've got it wet enough. And I'm just using my finger to flick the end of it. It's not quite not quite watery enough, so I grab some clean water on my finger, mix it back in. Tapping it's not working either, so back to the flick to get some snowflakes falling. There's a nice close up so you can see what's actually happening. And we're just making it snow across the page. So I'll take a quick second here to clean my brush really well from that white gouache and put the lid on the gouache and move it aside, because I've made that mistake more than once. And now the best part, the big reveal, the tape pull. It happens to be one of my most satisfying parts of doing a watercolor landscape, is getting that nice clean border and lifting the tape off. And there we have it, friends. If you followed along, I would love to see what you created. Tag me on Instagram. Any questions, comment below. I'm happy to answer any way I can. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for joining me.